Hello, I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry. Today's focus will be on imposter syndrome. So let's talk about it. So imposter syndrome is a condition that describes high achieving individuals who, despite their objective successes, fails to internalize their accomplishments. And so what this looks like is individuals work with a persistent notion of self-doubt and persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud or imposter. And so individuals who are struggling with imposter syndrome, they don't attribute their performance typically to their actual competence. What they do is they also consider setbacks as sort of like a confirmation bias to the professional inadequacy that they internalize. So imposter syndrome is not just one thing. It can look in a lot of different ways. So those who have imposter syndrome may show up as workaholics who are over planning, over analyzing, and very perfectionistic. Those who have this imposter syndrome may also show up as what's called lucky ducks. And so what that looks like is individuals attributing all of their success to luck and fearing that their luck will soon run out. Third, they may feel as if they're a con artist. And so some that have imposter syndrome may feel like they're just getting by based on their charm or some other kind of personality trait, and they're fearing and having that anxiety that one day they're going to be found out. And lastly, another manifestation is imposter syndrome of individuals who suffer with imposter syndrome may feel like, they are doing their very best to blend in like a chameleon in the background, because their perceived inadequacies are about to be exposed. So they walk around, with that fear. So let's examine the impact of imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome often coexists with things like depression, anxiety, lower self-esteem, other somatic symptoms and social dysfunctions. In the workplace, those affected with imposter syndrome may experience increased levels of stress and burnout. This would also lead to typically decreased job performance and lower job satisfaction over time. Employees who persistently question their professional legitimacy may also be at a higher risk of experiencing career retention issues, career advancement issues, because all these adverse psychological outcomes that I illustrated before all have an impact on how somebody views themselves in career, and may impact somebody going up for a job promotion, may impact somebody taking that extra work, may impact somebody taking that extra job. And even when they do these kinds of things, it may impact the performance thereafter based on that imposter syndrome that may manifest in that person. Now, there are a lot of causes as you look at the research of what causes imposter syndrome, or why someone may have it and why someone may not. And there are a few issues to think about, or a few aspects to think about. The first is change. Changes to one environment, changes to one's circumstances may precipitate, imposter syndrome from manifesting. And so what that indicates is imposter syndrome is not something someone has all the time. It could be situational based on what the environment looks like, based on their level of comfort with a task or a role, things like that. Some individuals walk around with a perpetual fear of failure. And so that fear of failure may be something someone does manifest in certain situations. It may be heightened due to the novelty of the situation or not. But fear of failure is also one. They also look at something related to that, perfectionism. Some individuals have that perfectionistic trait from a personality standpoint, and that might precipitate the manifestation of imposter syndrome too. And then this is not the focus of this video, but also family. And so if you look back in childhood and different things like that, the research talks a lot about that, but that's out of my scope. What imposter syndrome is not? Imposter syndrome is not, this person just has low self-esteem. That's not imposter syndrome. That may be a direct, result of imposter syndrome, but imposter syndrome in itself is not low self-esteem. So I just wanted to make sure we knew what it was and what it isn't, right? So now that we understand what imposter syndrome is and what imposter syndrome is not, let's talk about coping with imposter syndrome. And so as individuals, there are a few things we could do. First off, question the pervasive thoughts that may manifest in the workplace. Do these thoughts that I have about myself and about my performance, do they have any evidence? Do I have any proof of this occurring? Or is this something I am seeing? Or is this something I'm making up? Next, we could also talk with others in the work environment about these feelings. The research indicates that in situations in which peers or coworkers discuss their feelings of doubt and failure, it actually shows positive benefit for that imposter syndrome to kind of minimize, because you learn about oh, I'm not the only one who has this experience, or oh, you might have had this same job task before and you were nervous. And the benefit of talking with individuals in the system is I might be able to get tools and resources to help me spot on as it relates to what I'm going through at the moment. Now I'm about to switch gears because y'all know me by now. And so I do a lot of research, and I want to take you down a different path as we think about imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome was coined in 1978, and Dr. Pauline Clance, one of the original researchers who coined the term in the first place, she had said something like she wishes she didn't call it imposter syndrome. She wished she called it imposter experience. Because as we consider solutions to imposter syndrome, I wanted to opt to present something different, because these feelings of inadequacy typically get framed as a personal flaw, and that's not something I want to contribute to. So hear me out. While imposter syndrome is typically focused on the person, many of the articles that you read and the things that you read about imposter syndrome hyper focuses on it, where it looks sort of like victim blaming. So let's discuss something different, because we talked about what the individuals could do, which is great. Let's talk about what the organization can do. First, employers should mitigate the effects of imposter syndrome by creating healthier expectations, and furthermore, creating cultures where mistakes are not interpreted as failure. And this, by doing this, we can get into a situation in organizational culture where we can learn, right? Where people don't have to fear failure, where failure can look like, the word failure, where not accomplishing a task or getting something wrong can look like opportunities for growth and learning versus opportunity to chastise, because then that actually perpetuates the imposter syndrome somebody might walk in with, and we're not doing any justice there. And then we also need to publicly acknowledge and celebrate accomplishments in the workplace too. Many employees report that they don't feel like they're valued. They don't feel like their work is valued. They don't feel like their outputs are valued. And so being able to publicly acknowledge and celebrate those accomplishments, and even if somebody failed and they learned from it and they bounced back and created something new, celebrating that journey as well, because that actually creates a system where we're a culture of learning versus a culture of perpetual fear, right? And so that's kind of how we want to take that. Second, we need to normalize and destigmatize imposter feeling by providing a safe environment where people share these experiences openly. And so at the individual level, I talked about having group and having employees kind of talk about that. Imagine a situation where leadership created space for what did we learn this week, or what did we learn this quarter? Let's look back. And we just normalize that human aspect of getting things wrong, because nobody's perfect, right? We tend to try to do this thing where we normalize perfection. Well, let's normalize imperfection. Let's normalize that, but we normalize it in a standpoint of learning. And so in your environments, create structure where this can occur. Maybe in your performance appraisals. This could also occur in your monthly meetings or something like that. And you can use that as a way to look backwards and reflect and make changes. So if you think about it, let's just call it continuous improvement, right? You can make it in a way where it's not necessarily perfectionism, and it's not necessarily creating a culture of failure, because it's not really failure, it's continuous improvement. And so you just have to reframe in something more positive. Lastly, when imposter syndrome was originally coined in 1978, it was originally thought to only impact women. And what they found was it does impact both men and women, as the research progressed. But in light of this, much of the research still shows a differential impact of imposter syndrome as we think about the workplace for women and racial minorities. And there's plenty of research that supports this. So we need to improve low gender and racial representation across the organization. We also need to look at microaggressions like questioning intelligence. And we need to also look at other psychosocial costs that exist as we examine demographic differences. So my question for you is, as you think about imposter syndrome, what if imposter syndrome is not necessarily a disease of the mind, but perhaps a disease of the system?